All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Clausen. I am the Vice President for Research, Evaluation, and Innovation with Communities and Schools at the National Office. And I'm pleased to be here today and introduce to you all our first panel. With me, I have Kelly Hodge. She is the Safe Schools Advocate for Philadelphia, which is operated under the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. And then next to her, I have Michael Pennington. And Michael is the Director of the Department of Welfare's Office of Children, Youth, and Families. And then finally, we have Shirley Moore-Smeal, and Shirley is the Executive Deputy Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. I just want to remind everyone their bios are in your packet if you would like more information on this distinguished panel. We're going to talk to you today about the social impact of dropout. And often we hear about, and earlier this morning we've heard quite a bit about the economic impact of dropout, the high cost, which again, while we may talk about 14,000 dropouts every year here in Pennsylvania, that number is compounded as we look across the country. And in fact, the cost of those over 1 million dropouts a year can get into the billions of dollars. And over a decade, we're looking at $1 trillion or more in actual cost to society. And if we flip that, think about what that could mean in terms of savings to our country and to each state if we're able to intervene early and address the problem. So what we're going to talk about here is really the continuum of impacts. And oftentimes people think about dropout as an event, and it's not. As we heard, students don't just decide one day to drop out. It's a process. And we're going to talk about that process, look at the impact on different systems within the state of Pennsylvania, and then talk about what can be done and what is being done at different places along that continuum to intervene. So first, we're going to start with Kelly and hear from her in terms of what she's seeing in terms of the impact of the dropout problem in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning. I want to thank Communities and Schools for inviting me to be a participant in this particular event today, this inaugural event. It's a really important discussion that I personally, when I became the Safe Schools Advocate in December of 2011, I didn't really anticipate that this subject matter would really raise itself and be elevated in my job as the level of importance that it has become. It really has manifested itself on a daily basis in what I see and hear from people who come to my office or call my office in terms of their concerns about their children. Just by way of really brief background, my office is constructed in order to go ahead and assist victims of violence in schools, and I'm located in the school district building in Philadelphia. I assist all public school children. I do assist kids in charter schools, and so by the nature of that, I have people who walk in and will often say, you know, my child doesn't feel safe in going to school anymore for a variety of reasons. They may have been direct victims of a violent event, assaulted either sexually or physically in some other way, or, as was shared a little bit earlier by the Human Relations Commission, a lot of harassment and bullying and cyberbullying are the frequent calls that I see. And I never really anticipated what I would call the ripple effect or the collateral consequence of victimization, which is not only are they dealing with being a victim and trying to process that trauma, they are also, in the fear of going to school, not going to school. They are manifesting the physical ailments, nauseous, headaches, those things that they wake up and tell their parents, I don't want to go because I don't feel well. They are also exhibiting certain behaviors that make them disillusioned with school. The adults in the school environment aren't protecting me. I've told someone and no one is responsive to me. I don't feel like I can go there and I can't focus on learning. And clearly we know from all the data that you have heard thus far and will continue to hear throughout today that when that happens, that is part of that sign or that signal or that indicator that this child is potentially on a path towards becoming disengaged. And with disengagement comes disillusionment. With disillusionment comes that probably high percentage of the reason why children do drop out is because they just feel like nobody cares, as was shown in the brief video that was presented this morning. And so for my victims, I have children who have not gone to school for 4 to 6 weeks because they are afraid to go back and they don't know where is a safe place in that school community. And that's heartbreaking because these children are actually ones who their parents are trying often to find a way to get them back into school. It's not that the parents don't care. I think that what I've seen in my position is really a myth and a misnomer. Sometimes the parents just don't know how to navigate it. They don't know where to seek the support. They don't know who to call, or the numbers that they call, unfortunately, don't reach a person who actually can provide the solution. So they come to my office and I try to go ahead and facilitate that for them. But, you know, by way of anecdote, the stories I see are fairly consistent. While I also have engagement with the victimizers or the perpetrators, and their parents oftentimes are very forthcoming with the fact that they know their child has a behavioral concern or undiagnosed disorder. They really are distrustful of the mental health arena, or they're not really sure, you know, what a psychologist will be able to do besides labeling my child. And that's an arena that needs to be explored as well in this conversation, because until the proper identification is made of what the child's needs are, the proper support cannot be given. And without the proper support, again, it goes back to the cycle of what DPW is going to say when Mike speaks and represents that entity, and then what is going to be said by Shirley when she speaks on seeing the children and potentially young adults enter the juvenile justice system or the penal system. So that's just a little bit of kind of what I get to view on a daily basis, and why my interest in this truancy, dropout, and the preventive measures are so very, very important to me, because I want to make sure that the victims aren't re-victimized by then becoming behind and unfortunately feeling like there's no point to going to school anymore. I just don't want to be there.
Thank you, Kelly. Mike, can you tell us about what you're seeing and what are some of the impacts that...
Good morning, everyone. I'd also like to thank Communities and Schools and the Dropout Prevention Network for the opportunity to be here today for this exciting conference. Real quickly, our Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services is a bureau within the Office of Children, Youth, and Families. Our responsibility is we oversee the 6 state-run youth development centers and youth forestry camps I don't know what's... Excuse me. We oversee the 6 state youth development centers and youth forestry camps in Pennsylvania, which are for the highest risk youth in our juvenile justice system, as well as working on overall juvenile justice services in partnership with the Juvenile Court Judges Commission, the Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers, and other stakeholders. As many of you know, balanced and restorative justice is our philosophical and theoretical framework for our juvenile justice system, with 3 main statutory goals of community protection, accountability to victims and offenders, and helping develop competencies for our kids so that they can become productive citizens when they leave our juvenile justice system. A little bit of good news the good news is not that we have 35,000 delinquency dispositions in the Commonwealth. The good news is we've had a 23% decrease since 2007. Our secure detention admissions in Pennsylvania are down 20% since 2007, and our overall residential placements are down 29% since 2007. Regarding school status, we had Juvenile Court Judges Commission does a juvenile delinquency dispositional report each year, and they measure school status of kids and dispositions. For 2011 report, we had over 3,000 kids that were out of school at the time of their delinquency disposition. So over the last 4 years, if you go back, that's over 14,000 kids that were out of school at the time that they came into juvenile court and had a delinquency disposition. Nearly 62% of the youth were reported as having completed grades 9, 10, 11, or 12, or as being in another type of educational program. This figure is interesting when contrasted with the data on dispositions by age, where 78% of all dispositions were for youth ages 15 to 18, which, as we know, is typical ages for grades 9, 10, 11, or 12. So I think, this gap of 16% certainly could be indicative of low academic performance, falling behind in grades, which obviously is a common correlate for delinquency. And just briefly, the kids that come to our youth development centers, youth forestry camps, face a multitude of issues. Our average reading level for kids in our high-end facilities is 6th grade. Many of them are below 6th grade. So the challenges are immense for the kids that are coming into our system, because they're also dealing with histories of trauma, dealing with mental health issues, substance abuse issues. Obviously, many have had assaultive backgrounds, family issues, you name it. Our kids have a multitude of issues. So it's especially a challenge of reintegrating our kids back into the community for jobs, back into school, when we're dealing with so many different issues. A couple final things. We in Pennsylvania are starting to use a youth level of service risk need assessment. Since 2009, we've been administering that to our kids in our YDC system. And we collected data on over 1,900 youth entering our system, and 94% of the youth were moderate to high risk in employment and education. So that gives you kind of a good indication of the challenge and the work that we have to do. Also from an impact standpoint, in Pennsylvania, the cost to place a juvenile could be over $100,000 a year. That certainly depends on the type of placement, whether it's a secure placement or open residential facility. But, I visit our facilities every month, and I talk to the kids, and, the kids want to do well, and they're dealing with so many different challenges, and I think even though those challenges are great, I think the cost to the Commonwealth, the cost to society are going to be even greater if we don't work to successfully reintegrate those kids back into our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Well, so we've seen it manifest early on in school. We see what happens when, in terms of some of the impacts once they begin to enter into our juvenile justice system and our detention. And ultimately, these dropouts become adults. And Shirley she's going to talk to us about the impact she sees once they enter into our correctional facilities.
Okay, thank you. And the Department of Corrections is certainly pleased to be at the table, because we know that there is a direct correlation between high school dropouts and our inmate population. We currently have 26 correctional facilities plus 1 boot camp. Our population at this time is well over 50,000 inmates. And that's pretty significant, because we know across the country that 68% of state prison populations are representatives of those who have dropped out of high school. In Pennsylvania particularly, we have 41% of the male population are high school dropouts, and 31.3% of the female population are high school dropouts as well. And when you multiply that by the cost of roughly $30,000 per year to house an inmate, to provide for an inmate that's in our custody, the figure turns out to be $634 million annually that we're spending to address those that are in our system that have less than a high school education. So there's definitely a direct correlation there. Just some statistics for you. We do have in our system right now, we have 21 who are below the age of 18. And in addition to that, between 18 and 20-year-olds, we have 979 individuals that are in our system. And that's really significant when you look at the correlation between public safety and the population, and that really impacts each one of our communities. It impacts the individuals, it impacts the population, and it impacts us economically. We know that with high school dropouts in general, 3.5% are more likely to be arrested, and 8 times more likely to end up in our correctional system. There was a campaign not long ago that talked about No Kid Left Behind. And a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to attend our Corrections Education Association conference, and that's basically what the conclusion is that the State Department of Corrections is basically where the kids who are left behind go. So it's really critical for us if we can do intervention as early on as indicated that our population is going to reduce, and as a result, public safety is going to increase, and the economic resources that are currently spent in the correctional system can be front-loaded and reinvested in justice reinvestment, which is also a part of what the correction system is involved in now. So directly, high school dropout rates and prison population are closely tied together, and the impact of that is an effect on public safety.
Thank you, Shirley. So we know it's a problem. I think we'd all agree to that. We can see that the economic and societal impact is quite devastating for our nation as well as here in Pennsylvania. So what can we do about it? So Shirley, let's start with you. We'll work backward and try to get ourselves back within the schools. What are some of the things that you all are able to do or you think we can do to begin to address the dropout problem?
One of the things that we do, we have 2 facilities that are diagnostic and classification centers, and one is the State Correctional Institution at Camp Hill for all of the male offenders, and the other one is the State Correctional Institution at Muncie for all female offenders that enter our system. Part of that diagnostic and classification process involves administering tests to determine exactly where the offenders are, not only educationally, but what programs they may need once they're in our system and what we can provide for them. So that's the first step that we do. Directly related to education, everyone that comes in that does not have a high school diploma or a GED, they are required to attend at least 300 hours of mandated education. The goal is for them to get their GED prior to release, prior to trying to reintegrate into the society. So we have that initially, and all of our facilities are equipped with education departments so that we provide those classes to try and at least, if not reach the GED level, to at least increase a reading level or increase a grade level, increase mathematics. We offer a lot of vocational programming in our attempts to reintegrate people and prepare them for reintegration, but oftentimes it's necessary to give them basic skills before they can even get introduced into those vocational classes. So we do offer ABE, we offer English as a second language, we offer special education, and we service about 327 individuals a year through the special education department. And I know for my high school, that's larger than a high school that I graduated from and larger than a lot of other high schools, but that's what we deal with within the correctional system. We also offer mathematics, we offer GED prep classes, and we also have the Commonwealth Secondary Diploma Program that's available in our system as well. So we really try and address the needs of the offender, make sure that we prepare them for as long as we have them to make sure that they're better educationally and just programmatically for trying to be successful whenever they get back out. The other thing that we do is really focus on the parenting programs, and we know that corrections is a generational issue oftentimes, having just mothers, grandmothers, daughters confined at the same time in the same way on the male side of it. So if we can really teach basic parenting skills and emphasize the importance of education and how it needs to be mentored in the correctional system, then that's something else that we're doing. The Fatherhood Initiative, we just started in, actually in May, it will begin, and that's a program that's going to go out throughout all of our correctional facilities because we need to demonstrate and really teach a systematic approach and holistic approach to addressing all of the societal issues that the individual has. So we do that, and happy to report that even when we get those, just some figures in general, that we had 1,385 that passed the GED. We had 159 that passed their CSD. The vocational programs are done in conjunction with Department of Labor and Industry so that they have a sustainable employment or opportunities for sustainable employment whenever they get out. So we're really trying to collaborate with other agencies, with Department of Public Welfare, with juvenile justice to make sure that all that we can do in the time that we have the offenders is what we're doing. So we're really just trying to prepare them opportunity and give them something, and we have them as a captive audience oftentimes. So we're pretty much able to. And when they get into prison, and that's one of the differences that we see, it's really, really an accomplishment. And hopefully we're providing them, and we're told that we're providing them that safe environment that they can learn in, and that it's better, they're focused, and they're proud of their accomplishments. And it demonstrates to not only that individual, but to their children, to their parents as well, that they can accomplish something. And oftentimes that diploma or that vocational certificate is the first thing that they receive that really has meaning to them, that they can build upon in teaching their children why it's necessary to continue on in school. We also have a Read to Your Child program that emphasizes education. It promotes reading between the parents and the children or grandparents. That's a highly successful program that we have going on. That's read by the offender. It's videotaped. The book and the tape are both sent home to the child so that they can read along with the parent as they're reading. So we're promoting those ties, the family reunification, that whole aspect of it, and just addressing it as a systemic issue and seeing good results.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. Mike.
Okay. I think prevention and relationships are so critical, and partnerships. I think we got to do all we can to prevent kids from getting into our juvenile justice system and other systems in the first place. And I know Kelly's probably going to talk a lot about PCCD's efforts, which are very close to my heart since I worked there for 13 years. But I think we really got to, go back and look at those early warning signs and look at those risk factors early on so that we can intervene in these kids' lives at a much earlier time frame. And I think, the research certainly says that, you're going to have a bigger return on your investment when you're looking at evidence-based programs early on. And I agree with what Secretary Macra said, too, and I guess I better agree with what she said, is no one system can tackle this. I mean, not the schools, not the juvenile justice system. This needs to be a coordinated partnership. And I think we've really started to get there over the last several years of working better together, because resources have become very finite, and that really forces us to do much better in coordinating our efforts. I think we need to be more creative early on in schools, and how we deal with disciplinary issues and infractions, looking at what evidence-based programs or practices can be helpful in schools, and utilize those evidence-based programs or effective strategies in schools and communities. Some of those examples include school justice panels, there's truancy courts. I think mentoring, and I know many of you are familiar with mentoring, because kids need someone, they need a caring adult to go to, whether it's a big brothers, big sisters, or other effective mentoring approaches. I know schools are doing positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is an evidence-based model targeted at reducing disciplinary actions, and dropout rates, and improving academic importance by modeling and reinforcing student behaviors. I think a lot of times it's easy to see the negative things that kids do, but most of our kids do pretty well. It's a smaller percentage that are not doing so well, and I think a lot of times we don't reinforce those positive behaviors and the good things kids are doing enough, which is going to keep them, I think, on the right path. I did want to mention, I think it's important to note that there was a book published, a collateral consequences checklist. It's on the JCJC website, but there's serious consequences for, as you know, for kids that are adjudicated delinquent. Those potential impacts for kids are, their ability to get a job, their ability to serve in the military, to access schools or higher education. So that really, I think, underscores the importance of what we do early on beforehand, so that if we can prevent kids from getting in our system and handling them effectively through effective programming, I think the better off we're going to be. And I know you're going to hear a lot of great recommendations from the folks that are going to talk about truancy, and also the Pennsylvania Youth Survey later, which really talks about looking at community risk factors and family and peers and school risk factors. In our juvenile justice system right now, we're involved in a juvenile justice system enhancement strategy. It's been going on for a couple of years. It's a strong partnership with the Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers, PCCD, DPW, and our private providers. And basically what that is, we're trying to achieve our balanced and restorative justice mission through evidence-based practices, and making a commitment at all stages of the juvenile court process that, with fidelity, collecting good data, and putting in quality assurance mechanisms. And I won't go into all the stages of that because we don't have that much time. But basically what we're trying to do is, many counties are now using a risk need assessment. It's a valid risk need assessment that looks at 42 risk factors and needs for kids over 8 domains, which can, that's peer relations, family, educational, and employment. So when you do a risk need assessment, we're better able to identify the kids' issues, needs, their risk levels, so that we can help develop their case plans and basically have the right services for the right kids. And for those low-risk kids, that probably it's going to better be able to help us divert those lower-level kids out of our system and maybe into more community-based options where they may be better served, because a lot of times lower risk kids are really self-correcting, and research certainly shows that it's not good to mix low and high risk kids. It has that contagion effect, and it's really going to have the opposite effect and kind of drag those kids into our system. Another critical part of our strategy is diversion, which I kind of mentioned. Is we're trying to effectively divert kids where appropriate out of our system. As part of the MacArthur Models for Change initiative that we were involved with from 2005 to 2010, one of the key areas was diversion. I know PCCD has a subcommittee, and one of the documents that's also on PCCD website and JCJC is a guide to pre-adjudication diversion policy and practice. It's an excellent guidebook that kind of talks about, who needs to be involved when you're trying to effectively divert kids that may not, need to be in our juvenile justice system. And I wanted to mention family involvement and engagement. This is something I think we traditionally haven't done the greatest at, but we're putting much more emphasis on it, and I think we're starting to do a better job of trying to engage families at every part of that process. And I think folks certainly know in here that the better we engage families, I think the more successful we're going to do with kids. And the last piece I wanted to mention is kind of an exciting effort is that my bureau is taking over, is the Academic Career and Technical Training Initiative, which is the PAC project, for those who know that acronym. This is a joint effort with DPW, PCCD, JCJC, the Juvenile Court Judges Commission, the Chief Probation Officers Council, and the Pennsylvania Council of Children, Youth, and Family Services. And the initial focus areas of this project are, this is helping kids with academic, this is helping kids with job skills, this is helping kids get the credits and make sure they're transferred back into their schools. So we're going to be looking at screening and assessment, job readiness and employability skills, case planning, alignment of academic program with state standards, interagency coordination and transitional services, accelerating academic remediation, recovery and transfer, career and technical training, and also, we're not there yet, but working with kids, dually involved youth and dependent kids that need that help out into the community, that we hope to expand this initiative in the next couple of years, and obviously policy alignment. But those are some of the critical areas that we're working on.
Great. Kelly, what about you?
I will say that Mike kind of articulated a great deal of what PCCD has done, and since my office falls under PCCD, I'll just highlight some of them specifically, but he wonderfully was the author of a great many things as director of OJJDP when he was there, and so I will share this, that PCCD obviously has always and continues to recognize that obviously engagement of students in schools and families is critical to the success of the children. It works as an agency very diligently to try to address in issues that surround children who are at risk, and crime, violence, youth, drug use, those are the things that PCCD consistently tries to provide funding to entities in order to go ahead and combat those specific issues. It is clear that, as Mike said, evidence-based programs, when they're followed with fidelity, are successful. And that is what we need to find and continue to support and sustain are those particular types of efforts. PCCD has supported the creation of over 100 community coalitions connecting schools with county agencies and social service providers. And since 1998, PCCD grants have funded over 200 evidence-based programs and community prevention coalitions, and more than a third of these have been for school-based programs, and they all have included performance benchmarks which measure academic achievement, school attendance, and engagement. So I don't miss anything in terms of the examples. I'm just going to read to you that Big Brothers Big Sisters is one of the organizations that is supported by PCCD. In 2010 and 2011, 2,436 youth were served through this entity, and 67% of the mentees improved academic performance. It's a clear reflection of what Mike mentioned. It's a clear reflection of what Shirley articulated that they're doing within the, disciplinary or system of actually incarceration. Sadly enough, it isn't being done sooner, and when it is done sooner, you can see what the effects can be. 58% of mentees had less favorable attitudes toward peer drug and alcohol use. So clearly, the education that they received just through a mentor-mentee relationship, as well as the examples that they get to see, kind of the beyond school walls is one of the huge areas within Big Brothers Big Sisters of having kids go into the work community, go into offices and corporate environments, and actually see what their mentees do, and this is what I can do as well. So it has a wonderfully positive effect. Promoting alternative thinking strategies, also known as PATHs. It's an elementary school curriculum designed to prevent violence and aggression. In 2010 and 2011, 110 youth were served. 91% of those youth improved school performance. That's hard data numbers. You can't get around the success of that. And 76% of youth decreased antisocial behavior, which is huge. Those years, the middle school years, is what we're talking about with those children. We all have seen or heard or recognized that those years, particularly third grade that was articulated earlier, and beyond, 6th, 7th, and 8th, are the times where you see the huge potential of losing these children. And so this is a program that falls within that realm that really looks to possibly being able to save those children. You combine that with the Big Brothers Big Sisters, and you have two resources right there that are effective, and these are things that PCCD is supporting. You also have the Incredible Years. It is composed of 3 programs, one for children, one for parents, and one for teachers. And the huge plus of this, just in that sentence alone, is obviously it's recognizing the need for that rapport and that relationship, not just within the school structure or in the building itself, but out in the community. And that's exactly what I see every day in my work, in my office, when teachers are trying to outreach to kids and maybe they really don't know how to outreach to the parent. Or the parent comes in and says, this administration is not communicating with me. I'm trying, and I'm trying to see how I can go ahead and help my child. And it's that fundamental communication factor that is huge to whether or not any program, supported, evidence-based, or otherwise, would be successful. I will also add that from that program, 70 youth were served, 93% of youth improved emotional competence in 2010 and 2011 again. 93% of the youth improved concentration and attention skills. We all know the growing rate of children who are diagnosed with a variety of disorders. I call them things that end in the letter D. And those disorders that obviously are seen as or often, given to a child or a child is diagnosed with and I guess set as predictors. These are all the things that are going to happen to them because they have attention deficit disorder or defiant disorder or whatever disorder it is. And while I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a physician and I can't speak to the truth and efficacy of those diagnoses, I will say this. I do see a large number of children with them in Philadelphia. I do think that there's definitely a nexus to the high poverty, low socioeconomic rate of the community that makes up Philadelphia, and unfortunately there isn't enough education done with the parents' knowledge of what resources are available to them in order to go ahead and address that diagnosis properly and make the IEP and make the CSAP and all those things that are set in place to really assist the child effective. You can have an IEP, but if nobody's following it, it's only as good as the paper that it's written on. Also, another program, Strengthening Families program for parents and youth ages 10 to 14. 105 families were served, and 43 parents increased the participation in their program. They have more consistent discipline at home. The youth improved their peer resistance skills. 51% of the youth involved in this improved stress coping skills. How do they deal with stress? I have children that come to me that they're in high school, 9th or 10th grade, and they're walking their 1st or 2nd grade brother and sister to school, and they are walking through, harrowing neighborhoods. And it's a matter of a few blocks or less than a mile, but they're seeing and witnessing a lot on their journey to and from school. And these things have impact. Then there's the Life Skills Training Program, which is a classroom-based program. In 2010, we had 1,221 youth that were served. 48% of the youth improved communication skills. 29% of youth decreased favorable attitudes towards alcohol, tobacco, and other drug usage, which is phenomenal. The OEA's Bullying Prevention Program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, served over 5,000 youth in 2010 and 2011, and 89% of youth reported feeling empathy towards seeing another student being bullied. And we all know right now the current trend of bullying. And people ask me, why is bullying kind of in the news so much more today, or why is it receiving such the attention, and what have I seen regarding bullying? And I didn't see as much of it as a DA in terms of actually a charge, because it isn't in the Crimes Code. It's not an offense that I would see. However, I will say that the manner in which it's manifested, technology has added to the stinging effect of it. If it is on YouTube, if it is on Instagram, if it is on any other mechanism that can be used to electronically transmit, it never goes away. And so for the kid who maybe got jumped in the alley on the way home, and the only person that knew about it was the person who did it and the kid who was jumped, and he'd go home and tell his parents, not everybody in the school the next day would know. Now it's videoed, now it's posted, and everybody in the world knows. And that kid has to walk that hall with that scourge. And that kid is the one who ends up dropping out of school because they can't handle that particular type of scrutiny, of repeated victimization. And who really could? They're children. Us as adults who really could. If somebody videotaped us in a situation where we are being victimized, and then we had to know that everybody in the room knew that this happened to us. There's other programs, family functional therapy, multi-systemic therapy. I'm not going to kind of go through every litany of numbers and percentages, but these are things that PCCD has supported and will continue to do so. All I will add is that from what Shirley mentioned and from what Mike mentioned, the reintegration piece, for what I see from juveniles reintegrating back into the school district from a placement and having that wraparound service available to them, one of the key struggles for children, and maybe we can work on figuring this out, is credit translation. and having the credits that they achieve at, let's say they've been placed in Kentucky or Texas or wherever, Colorado. These are all places that when I was a prosecutor, I would argue for children to be placed, and they would get placed there. Not necessarily Pennsylvania. They're Pennsylvania kids, but they're not here. Or within the Commonwealth. They could be kids from Philadelphia placed in Allegheny County or very nearby. They take courses, they study, they receive credit. The credit doesn't translate to the district for whatever reason. That's a tangible issue that I will pose to this group, because that is something that if a child comes back, they're looking to actually reintegrate into the regular traditional school environment, and they have gone and taken a math credit or earned a math credit that doesn't translate. Dejection. I'm behind still. I'm not only behind, I'm coming from placement and I'm behind, and I have a probation officer that I'm reporting to. And everybody's going to look and say, hey, you know where he's coming from, or you know where she's coming from. Again, disengagement, lack of support. That's something that is, we shouldn't have to wait till it gets into either the penal system or the juvenile justice system, but it's a reality. And so the question becomes, how do we actually pose a solution that will make it so that when the kids are reintegrated, they actually feel supported and they have that desire to actually do well? Because the long and short of it is, they all do. They all have some dream. When I ask them, what is it that you want to do or plan to be? Every last one of them will sit there, even the ones with kind of the label of being such the bad child, there is no hope left. That is not true. They all have something that they yearn to do. There is usually something they do very well, and it just is tapping into that and making sure that teachers and administrators and counselors and parents all are on the same page with understanding what's available to them. So that's
all right. So we have end with some hope. And I think what we heard, some things we heard were we need to do adequate risk assessments. We need to pay attention to those early warning indicators. We need to intervene early, invest in prevention, and I would say intervene early and often and ongoing in terms of along the continuum. We also heard you need to engage, and that's not just engaging the student, but we need to engage the family. We need to engage the community. We need to offer positive reinforcement. We need to connect students with a caring adult who can be there to support them, to provide that positive praise, to monitor their progress, provide ongoing support. And again, I'll echo, we don't want corrections to be the first place that they are acknowledged and recognized for completing a GED or doing something positive. So thank you, and I will open it up for questions that the audience may have for our panelists. Yes?
Yes. Thank you for all that you shared with us. It was amazing. And I heard a recurring term, trauma. And I'm with the Education Committee for the NAACP in Pennsylvania. We've looked into this issue of trauma, which is a medical condition, which behaves in the body in ways that impede learning and that interfere in appropriate social conduct. But I didn't hear anyone talk about it as a medical condition. And I didn't hear anyone talk about, even though you talk about the programs that allow these children to tap into their resilience, that all teachers in the Commonwealth need to be inserted into the physiological impact this trauma has that is behaving in the classroom as low performance, that is behaving in the hallways as inappropriate social behavior. So I don't think we can address the needs of these kids without identifying trauma, calling it a medical condition, and talking about the democratizing cultures that allow kids to move through it. We can talk all day and for years, but if we don't acknowledge it's a medical condition, we cannot address it.
And I will just say that I think you make a superb point. Dr. Sandra Bloom is with Drexel University. You're nodding your head because you know of her. With Drexel University in Philadelphia. And she actually was brought in to lead the School District of Philadelphia's kind of 3-day safety summit that was co-supported by my office last year in August. And that summit was for teachers and administrators to receive instruction on a variety of things through breakouts. But the one thing that wasn't a breakout, that was a comprehensive instruction for the entirety of the body, was on trauma-informed approach. And the nature of brain development, the effects of trauma physiologically on the body, and what that means to children as they develop. And everybody was blown away by what she presented, and it's continued to be done, at least at this point in Philadelphia. There is a smaller work group task force that I'm a part of, as well as many others, in going over case studies and reviewing case examples to see why, you know, John, who's 34 and just got out of the Department of Corrections for whatever offense he committed, what was John's life before he got to that point, from birth through school to the offense that led him into. And so it is very, I would suggest, if there's ever an opportunity to have Sandra Bloom address this group, maybe in a future conference, she is amazing in her teachings, and there truly is that nexus. And you're very correct, it's something that has to be understood by educators, because if they don't, they really will not be able to fully help and assist children in the academic setting on a daily basis. And that's, as I refer to it, the trenches. That is in the place where all the work is happening every single day, day in and day out.
And if I might, as a final comment, those 50,000 folk who are incarcerated have children sitting in classrooms in an affective daze of shame and trauma.
And that's just to speak to both points, and where it relates to trauma, I know that when you look at the pathways for females and how they get into the system, that's one of the common denominators that we see. And it's not dealing with the abuse issues, dealing with the trauma issues that manifest in, the alcohol addictions, the drug addictions, and all of that leads down to the criminal aspect that materializes by them being present in the system. But another thing that we can do moving forward is, and we're doing this, is to recognize that there are children of incarcerated parents, and to look at what impact that has. Just yesterday, I was at a conference that dealt with, not only they had representatives of someone who was incarcerated, that was a mother that had children, but also the children of the parents that ended up in foster care and how that impacts them. And there's a lot of myths that concern them, and I think education is totally key in understanding that the children of incarcerated parents are not a reflection of the parents, but recognizing that they have needs that need to be addressed. They need the support, they need the support system as well, because oftentimes their support system is in prison, but recognizing that that relationship is still necessary to be maintained in order to address some of those issues. So again, I think just education and lots of commonality between the three of us that are representing here, and it's real critical that we talk about the issues and that we're not isolated into our own department, but recognizing that it is bigger than one department, that we need to be talking across agencies to see what we can do. I know that we're working to look at diversion, because one of the recidivism points is, or the risk factor is, just simply being introduced into corrections increases your chances of returning. So how can we assist with juvenile justice and with communities in particular to make sure that diversionary programs are in place to address those needs? As the Department of Corrections, what can we do? And that's why we're doing the family reunification and the mentoring, and all of that is something that's brand new to community corrections. But if by chance, and if in fact they do get to us, and we know that they do, but what can we do to not only keep them out, but keep them from coming to us in the first place? And the first part of that is acknowledgement, identifying what the issues are, what the pathways are, and working collectively to address them.
Yes.
I will make and I have 5 children, and we adopted. And our youngest son had traumatic brain injury. And we have been fighting for 2 years now, trying to get a diagnosis and support with trauma informed. Look at us like we have 3 heads. And the school system, the health system, my wife's an RN. I'm a director of secondary ed in public school. The IEPs, we know the system, and we struggle. We're struggling, and we're in the system. Talk about agencies, talking to agencies and so forth. That's great. It's so overly complex. And the barriers within these systems, within these programs, systems, whatever you want to call it, that don't allow for common sense of the child to be met. And it took us years to get one person to listen. Now things are slowly starting to move forward. We're at a point now where we're just and just one other piece. My wife has done a lot of work in doing common form work, and she went in being a parent advocate. You talk about parents being involved. It's an important component. An actual parent at a school function doesn't mean they don't care. That means they maybe involved in other things, that they have to food on the table or whatever it is. But having parent advocates for parents help them navigate the system is so important. And there's a program around the state. I know there's one in Allegheny County that my wife has researched, and we're trying to get some of that, bring it to Lancaster County where we live. And again, it is not easy. But I have other thoughts, and I can go on probably all day. But I'll stop there.
Does anyone want to comment?
I will say this. I know the complexities of navigating it. I'm actually since I'm still learning the educational realm, my realm was criminal justice, and that was my background. I saw kids on the back end, either as victims or when I was a public defender in a different jurisdiction there as well. I'm amazed at how difficult it is for people to navigate the process. I think that you make a really good point that I think many people in this room maybe haven't appreciated before, but have seen glimpses of unless it was personal to you, which is we really do need to make it much easier for parents to navigate getting help for their children. And don't presume what I said earlier, which is that if a parent, eventually they'll just stop. The parents will get exasperated, and many of my parents in Philadelphia just stop because they maybe don't have the expertise or the access or the educational acumen to actually know where else to go. And they just give up. And when they give up, then the results are their children never get service until they commit an offense and or are victimized. So they're either in DPW or they're in Shirley's world, in the juvenile justice or the state penal system. And shame on us if that is in fact the consequence. But I do agree with you that it does need to be simplified a great deal, and maybe that is a working document that can be generated from a conference like this. Maybe that is something that can be, proposed. And I would suggest that anyone that, like yourself, has that personal experience and actually can put a face to a scenario or a situation or a circumstance, it makes it much more tangible and much more real. And that hopefully will resonate in getting something done.
One last comment.
Thanks for sharing your comments. Somebody in my office just the other day, she has a special needs child and was just explaining the difficulties that she was going through. Not the same issue as yours, but she even had knowledge of the systems, and I can't imagine what it's like for folks that, you don't even know who to call, you don't even know who to talk to. She has resources where she can call people. So, and I agree, Kelly, that, whoever's documenting this, maybe we can, I think we got to get the necessary folks together take these different issues and deal with them, or there needs to be a mechanism to deal with these issues, because especially when it impacts multiple systems, because we got to have the right people at the table to address these and hopefully get some resolution or something that changes the way we do practice and around. So thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. Oh, one more. Let's do one last question. Okay.
My potential is a guide that was available on the website that you said it kind of quickly.
Is that the diversion guide?
Yes.
You can find that either on the JCJC website, www.jcjc.state.pa.us, and I believe it's on PCCD's website at pccd.state.pa.us.
And what's the name of the guide?
It's a guide to pre-adjudication diversion policy and practice.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists. And just to remind everyone, if you do have other questions, there's a card in your packet that you can write your question down and turn those in at the end, and we'll be sure to get those answered for you. So again, thank you.
Welcome up to the podium Cindy Stoltz, who I introduced earlier, and Cindy was nice enough to suggest we take a break, which was a good idea, I think. But Cindy is joining us with a panel discussion, and I'll let her introduce her co-presenters. So Cindy, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Well, if I'm not remembered for anything else, I'll be remembered as the person who gave everybody a break when they really needed one this morning. So good. Well, it is a pleasure for me to be here. I think I don't have to lean in there because I'm wired. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. It is a pleasure for me to be here with all of you who obviously, I don't know who everyone in the audience is. I'm hoping that we'll hear more of that throughout the day so that we can hear from you with good questions and thoughtful comments. But I'm appreciative of the opportunity to be here with all of you here today to talk about some of these important issues. My connection to the issue of school dropout is really threefold. First, I have had the pleasure of chairing with the Honorable Judge Kuhn from Adams County the Pennsylvania Children's Roundtable's Task Force on Education Success and Truancy Prevention since 2009. My goodness, have we been doing this since 2009? Holy cow, long time. Since 2009. I also, 2 years ago, was appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to chair Pennsylvania's Juvenile Court Procedural Rules Committee, which is responsible for drafting all the rules of procedure which govern court proceedings in dependency and delinquency matters. And during that time, the committee proposed rules that were ultimately adopted by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which require judges and relevant stakeholders in court proceedings to address educational issues at every stage of dependency and delinquency proceedings. To my knowledge, Pennsylvania is the only court in the nation that has rules that now mandate addressing educational issues at every stage of the proceedings, and that's something that Pennsylvania can be proud of. Thirdly, I also have the pleasure of being a member on the advisory board for the Dropout Prevention Network, and I'm thankful for that opportunity because I've learned so much from all the members on that group, and that ultimately resulted in this summit today. I'm here because this issue matters. I'm very passionate about education issues, and particularly about issues related to truancy. And truancy is the precursor to dropout. Truancy is the hello, if you will, to dropout. If we can't address school attendance issues, we can never hope to solve the dropout problem. So I'm here today to talk about why this issue matters to the courts and how the courts have partnered with Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare, with Pennsylvania Department of Education, through the Roundtable Initiative to address this issue. It matters because Pennsylvania experienced a 2.5 increase in overall truancy rates from school year 2009-10 to school year 2010-11. This equates to a reported almost 45,000 additional truant students. It matters because Pennsylvania experienced a 5% increase in the number of truant students in grades 1 through 5 during that same period. This equates to roughly 11,600 more students in grades 1 through 5. It matters because 45 counties reported that they experienced some increases in truancy during that period, and 23 counties reported over a 40% increase in truancy during that period. Now, has truancy really increased that much during that period, or is it just because we're raising a sense of urgency around the need to address it? There's a lot of speculation around that, but the important point is that it's important to address the truancy issues. Let me give you a little bit of background on the Roundtable Initiative for those of you who may not be familiar with it. In 2007, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court created the Office of Children and Families in the Courts to prioritize the court's handling of cases involving children in the courts, and particularly children involved in child abuse and neglect proceedings. Through that Office of Children and Families in the Courts, the Supreme Court created a roundtable structure to promote best practices through Pennsylvania. There is one statewide children's roundtable, 8 leadership roundtables, which are based on county size, and now I'm happy to report 50 local children's roundtables that are working together to address issues impacting children in the dependency system, one of which is the truancy issue and education success. The roundtables are each powerful coalitions of cross-systems partners that identify challenges. They work together to implement best practices and to hold each other accountable for established goals, for common goals, and for implementation efforts. In 2009, the Supreme Court heard from all of these various roundtable leaders at the state level, at the leadership roundtable level, and from all of the local children's roundtables in the counties. Heard from all of those leaders that truancy was an important issue that could not be ignored. Heard this primarily from child welfare leaders and from judges who were hearing dependency and delinquency cases. Some of you are nodding your head. You know that people have been kind of scratching their head on how to address the truancy issue in the court system, in the child welfare system, and education for a long time. The charge of the truancy work group, which was then created by the Supreme Court Children's Roundtable, was to gather information about critical systemic issues in Pennsylvania regarding truancy, to identify nationally recognized best practices as well as Pennsylvania best practices, and to outline an approach and a series of recommendations for reducing truancy in Pennsylvania. That report of the truancy work group of the Supreme Court's Children's Roundtable was issued in May 2010. Those recommendations were adopted by the statewide roundtable. Again, statewide roundtable is a partnership between the Supreme Court, DPW, and now I'm so happy to say the Department of Education, which has been a wonderful partner in our efforts to address truancy and education stability. The work group includes a variety of Pennsylvania experts from the court. Our work group has included judges, magisterial district judges, and court administrators. From child welfare, OCY administrators, managers, and caseworkers. From education, we have representatives from the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, the Association of Elementary and School Principals, and some high school principals who sit on that group. From juvenile justice, Mike Pennington from PCCD is here. He long served on our truancy work group when we produced those recommendations. From the Council of Chief Probation Officers, and more recently the Education Law Center. That group met diligently every month for about 2 years, and we had full participation at those meetings. It was sometimes cumbersome to maintain control in a room of stakeholders who were all passionate about addressing issues of truancy, but that group worked well together collaboratively because this issue matters. I'm going to turn the podium over to Judge Kuhn to talk to you a little bit more about why the issue matters specifically to judges in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Cindy. It's great to be here, everybody. You know, you may not know this. I heard that Cindy at one time was a singer for a backup singer with the rock. She really knows how to work an audience, doesn't she? I'm glad to see a lot of new faces for me, and that means if you come to Adams County, you haven't appeared in the court system, and I'd like to keep it that way. I've been a judge in Adams County since January of 1986. The first part of my judicial career, I was doing mostly criminal and civil cases. So from the criminal arena, I ended up reading a lot of pre-sentence investigation reports and saw a lot of evidence of folks who were in the criminal justice system that had not graduated from high school. And early on in my career, the philosophy in the criminal justice system was a whole lot different than it is now. Punish, make people comply with certain conditions, and push them through the system, and then hope you never see them again. And we weren't doing a particularly good job of rehabilitating anyone. And from an educational standpoint, it was obvious that if you have fines and costs, if you have other issues you have to deal with, you don't have an education, you can't get a good job, it becomes a spiral effect that's a problem. In 2002, I moved into the juvenile arena, and this was somewhat of an eye-opening experience for me. I feel on the issue of truancy a little bit at an internal conflict. My father quit school in 8th grade. And in the first half of the 20th century, if you're in a farming community, that wasn't that big of a deal. He quit school because that's about all that was expected, and went off to work on a family farm. My mother did finish high school, but the idea of college, I mean, that just wasn't something that anybody was thinking about. I came along, and I don't know where this came from. From 7th grade on, I never missed a day of school. It wasn't because they told me I had to go. It was just sort of this understanding of an expectation. So there's a lot of family support there, or internal drive to maybe I just felt that if I missed a day of school, I was going to miss that great school lunch, or something was going to happen that I was going to get behind. But for a lot of the kids that we deal with, there is something missing. And in juvenile arena, it's trying to find out what's missing. For those of you who aren't familiar with the court system and as it relates to truancy, let me give you just a brief introduction. The current school code was devised in 1949, and it put in certain provisions with regard to compulsory school attendance. It placed generally upon the magisterial district judges, which is what they're called now, back in those days with justice of the peace, that if a school felt that a child was truant, and interestingly, they use that word, but they don't define it, so we'll talk about that later. They could file a citation with the MDJ. They could file it against the parents, they could file it against the child, depending on the circumstances and the age of the child. Parallel to that system is the juvenile system, and in the Juvenile Act, a child who has violated the compulsory education requirements can be brought into court and alleged to be a dependent child. Now, to give you a little bit of a breakdown, a dependent child is the one that's dealing with children and youth services. A delinquent child is one who, if they were an adult and they committed a criminal act and they were in need of treatment supervision, that's a delinquent child. And they're supervised by juvenile probation officers. But the legislature decided in the Juvenile Act that a truant child who appears in front of the juvenile court is a dependent child. So in that arena, I started getting these cases of children 30 days, 40 days, 60 days, truant from school, and all of a sudden we're getting these cases toward the end of the year. And it became pretty evident to anybody to take a look at it, that year's lost. In most cases, the children are failing, and we all know what happens. You fail 9th grade, now you're behind, your motivation in 10th grade's a little less, and you hit a certain age, what can you do? You can quit. At a certain point, if your parents agree, you can sign out with their assistance, or you get a little older, you can sign out on your own. And when we would get these kids, then the issue is, what can we do to help them? Well, it was a lot more than, now you know you have to go to school every day. That wasn't going to work. How do you drill down and figure out what's going on within the child, within the family, that you can address to get this child back into school? What inspiration can you give them that they can be successful, that they have value, and that they're important? And it became pretty evident that one of the things we need to do is address this problem earlier, not only earlier in the year, but earlier in their educational experience. Our work group, in looking at the statistics, discovered in 2009, there were about 8.6% of the Pennsylvania students reported to be truant. Now that's reported. And I emphasize, that's reported. And that's any child who has missed at least 6 days or more. But it didn't address tardies, and it didn't, and there's 501 school districts in Pennsylvania, and every school board likes to have their own policy, and they define what it means to be excused and an unexcused absence. So when you start reporting around the Commonwealth, you can get all kinds of different versions of what all this means. So what's a court supposed to do? And that became a very frustrating problem. Can we salvage the high school education? How do we get credit recovery for this child? Or do we have to look, can we even get a GED for the child? What success can we get? And how do we get the families to be motivated to get those kids up and into school? I'll give you just one quick example to tell you what an experience I had. Single mom living with 2 daughters. She would leave at work at 4 o'clock in the morning because she had a job in an underground mine. I don't know exactly what she did. I didn't even know we had mines in Adams County, but I got educated in that respect. And she expected that her children were going to school. They weren't. And the school district would file citations with the magistrate, and she didn't want to be bothered with it. So she would pay the fines. And she was paying over $2,000 a year in fines because she just didn't want to deal with it. And the kids were not going to school. And that's when we got the case. Now think about that. If you're a teenager, what's the first thing you'd like to get? A car. And mom just spent over $2,000 in truancy fines, just giving money away because the kids weren't going to school. There was a disconnect there. They weren't seeing any value. So from the court standpoint, this is a very serious problem. And I can tell you that there's a concern among children and youth agencies. Anybody here in children and youth agency? Okay. I hope you may disagree with me, but children and youth folks, social workers, come out of school or they want to go into that field, they want to help abused and neglected children. And the tendency is not going to school. That should be probation's problem. Just make the kids go to school. That's all we have to do. Probation has more power than children and youth. But yet, it is the children and youth folks that have the training to deal with the family to address the underlying problems. So it was a great honor for me to be selected to be part of the state work group that Cindy was talking about, and work with some really great people to collaborate in coming up with some ideas on this subject. And with that, what we're going to offer for you at this point is some of the recommendations that came out of the work that we've been doing for the last 4 years, and hopefully you'll find that they make a lot of sense to you. Cindy?
So the recommendations, which I believe all of you should have in your packets or in front of you, I think they were handed out. We did a short version of the recommendations. If you're interested in reading the complete report, the 2010 report, it's online under the Office of Children and Families in the court's website. So you could Google that and find it online. But the one-page summary you have in front of you, the recommendations all focus in 5 key areas. They focus on collaboration, on an enhanced school climate and school culture around education, on prevention and early intervention efforts, and creative partnerships that use data to inform decisions and build sustainable resources. The report does not propose what I think the expectation was from a lot of stakeholders in Pennsylvania that would come out of this work group. It does not propose the magic bullet program for solving the truancy problem. The group much discussed what the answers to truancy should be, and decided that they were many and varied, and they really depended on the strengths and weaknesses in individual communities. So the report doesn't propose a one-size-fits-all. Instead, it reflects the work group's belief that a comprehensive community-based effort incorporating all of the key elements that come from the recommendations are really the best approach to addressing the truancy issues and school attendance issues. So we're going to walk you very quickly through some of the recommendations and highlight what those are. But before I start with that, let me indulge you for a minute. So coming late in the morning, right, you have to sort of re-energize the group, and I want to make sure that I live up to Judge Kuhn's comments about, right, me as energizing an audience. Help me out here. There's what was the Cameron Crowe movie, from which came the famous line, one of the most famous lines in movie history, "You had me at hello." Does anybody know what that movie was? Jerry Maguire, right. I threatened to bring Mike Pennington up here and do a role play to be Tom Cruise, but I won't do that and put him on the spot. So you had me at hello, right? I think I said earlier, I may have mentioned that for us and for our work group, truancy really is the hello to solving the dropout issue. If we can't grab our kids at that first point, if we miss the opportunity, and the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare mentioned this morning in her opening comments. She referenced lost opportunities, right? And we truly will miss the opportunity to grab our kids at that early warning sign, right? When kids stop coming to school, especially in the elementary schools. If we can grab kids at that point, we can hope to address the dropout issue. What's the second famous line that came from that movie? Does anybody remember? There were 2 lines that came out of that movie. Show me the money, right? Show me the money. So what do we do once we identify the kids at the front door, right? They're not coming to school. We have to show them the money at that point. We have to create effective strategies that show them we are engaged, we care, we want to create a school climate which encourages them, which nurtures them, which engages their family members to get them to school and to keep them coming to school. And so I wanted you to just remember that as we walk through some of these recommendations. So the first recommendation is to demonstrate an effective community-based collaboration, including sharing accountability and responsibility for truancy. One of the things that happens so often in communities is that there are a number of really great efforts that are happening in pockets to address school attendance issues. So from the school district side, there are a number of initiatives, and teachers are engaging in their own best practices to motivate students and to engage students, and magisterial justices at the point at which they see students referred to them are trying to bring in some community partners because they know that the fines that they have the ability to impose don't necessarily work. They don't necessarily solve the problem. So some of the most creative efforts are happening, but they're happening in pockets, and that community stakeholders aren't really talking to each other. And the first recommendation in this report really stems from that recognition that there needs to be a meeting of the minds, and that someone needs to assume a leadership role to convene community stakeholders to identify what are the weaknesses in our community, what are the strengths in our community, and where will we find those champions who will step up to the plate and say, we will take a lead here because this is where some of our most challenging issues are. That's what this first recommendation addresses. It suggests utilizing the local children's roundtable. We know we have 50 of them across Pennsylvania now as one vehicle to form a community truancy coalition. Judges can be very effective conveners of meetings, of community meetings. I say this because I'm a court administrator. When a judge calls a meeting, people show up. So it doesn't need to be a court-driven agenda. The agenda should be collaboratively driven by all the stakeholders at the table, and the stakeholders should include the schools. They should include, in some cases, the medical community for all those doctors who are writing excuses, right? Parents who call and ask for the medical excuses for kids, right? Should include juvenile probation officers, should include child welfare stakeholders, should include mental health professionals. All of the folks who are relevant and touch kids and address these truancy issues must be at the table. But a judge in that community, especially the dependency judge, can be a very effective convener of those multiple stakeholders. Cultivating positive working relationships so that they can effectively communicate across systems. Communication, key to individual relationships, also key to effective relationships between and among institutional stakeholders, between and among organizational stakeholders who are all trying to deal with the same issue. And developing ongoing opportunities for cross-training. This is one of the areas where I think our work group has been able to be most effective because we have partnered with organizations like the Child Welfare Resource Center that now has developed a curriculum around truancy for child welfare professionals that is just about to be released sometime later on this summer. Others who are interested in attending may be able to do that as well. There's now a curriculum on truancy for magisterial district justices, which was really championed by the statewide MDJs Association in partnership with our work group. The second recommendation focuses on an education, culture, and climate that prioritizes students' connections to their school and engages families. And I really have to give kudos to the Department of Education team that was on our work group that really championed this particular recommendation and all of the various subpoints under this recommendation. So the problem, as defined, is that the lack of a healthy, productive, and safe educational culture and climate at the school contributes, we know, to truancy and to high school dropout rates. With so many requirements on our school districts, with so many requirements on our teachers, on our school administrators, truancy is sometimes not identified as a top priority, and we understand why that is. But the absence of a connection between kids and their school, between family members and the school, leads to further truancy, it leads to poor performance, it leads to high dropout rates. So we have to work together to create a school climate where students and their families feel safe, feel welcome, feel wanted and connected to that educational environment. My older kids would say, at this point they would say, hello, what motivates me to get up every morning to go to a place where I don't feel welcome, where I don't feel safe, where I'm going to be bullied, where I'm not encouraged or challenged to do better? If we can't motivate kids to come to school and stay in school, then we don't have hope of addressing the truancy issue either. Prioritizing the issues of truancy in school. Deputy Secretary Dumarest mentioned this morning the truancy toolkit. Again, kudos to the Department of Education for championing that and for reprioritizing that. That has been in the past a very effective tool for a number of different stakeholders to address truancy. Engaging parents, we already talked about, and developing incentives and sanctions along a continuum when addressing truancy, with an emphasis on encouraging a student to continue their education. Often we don't look at balancing those incentives and sanctions. Sometimes we're too heavy on the sanctions, right? Out-of-school suspension should never be utilized as a punishment for a truant youth. That was one of the conversations that our work group had over and over and over again, and they would shoot me if I didn't emphasize that to you here today. But developing a continuum, developing a series of thoughtful incentives and sanctions along a continuum to address a truancy issue is important. For recommendations 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to turn it over to Angela Sager to talk with you about those.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Sager. I'm with the Office of Children and Families in the Courts, in the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts. I have the pleasure of being the staff person for Judge Kuhn and Cindy Stoltz, and actually Judge Ullman from Berks County as well on the Educational Success and Truancy Prevention Work Group. I'm just going to briefly run through recommendations 3, 4, and 5. I can see that we're running close on time, I'm guessing. Recommendation 3 really talks about early intervention strategies. And I just wanted to share one program with you that's working across Pennsylvania in Lycoming County, if any of you are familiar with that area. We have the Children and Youth Administrator from Lycoming County on our work group, and he's shared a program with us that's been very successful and actually is being implemented in other places across the state. There are children and youth workers actually in their schools who are cross-funded by both child welfare and the school in their helping children on the ground, trying to get to some of those underlying issues addressing truancy. This program has been very effective. The kids in the school don't know they're children and youth workers. They actually wear the school personnel badge. They're very engaging, so that stigma of working with children and youth is not attached to them, and they're having tremendous results with that program. I believe last year they had around 700 kids in that program. I think only 20% of them were actually referred to Children and Youth Services to be worked with directly with the agency, and only 2% of that 20 actually had any sort of court involvement. So really trying to get in and work with the children at the entry level before the truancy becomes an issue, and addressing those root causes is really what recommendation number 3 is about. 4 was data sharing. As we looked at our group, we realized that the data that was out there was not so great. We didn't really have a good handle on what the data showed. So our recommendation 4 was really around gaining some information around data and also being able to share that data. Just as no one system can actually tackle truancy, also no one system's data can actually tell us what's happening. So really, we need to work together to try to share that data and better inform kids. I will tell you just from the court's perspective that last year alone we had 77,500 truancy citations filed with magisterial district courts across the Commonwealth. That does not include Philadelphia. Philadelphia does not actually have magisterial district courts, so if you think about the number of kids who are going through Philadelphia's court system, obviously that number would be much higher. So data is something that we're looking at. We're going to continue to look at and think about ways that we can share that data together. And then the 5th recommendation really is around building sustainable funding bases and allocating resources on data-informed decisions. So really trying to think about how we can build those sustainable funding bases. One thing that we talked a lot about over the last couple of years was the issue of reform to truancy legislation. Our work group worked very hard on coming up with a number of recommendations around legislation, and Judge Kuhn is just going to briefly talk to you about that issue and what our work group's recommendations are around the issue of legislation reform. Judge?
I know we're pushing the envelope really tightly here, so I'll try to do this really quickly because, quite frankly, we could talk about legislation for a couple hours. Our frustration with the school code, and no disrespect to the folks who put that together in 1949, but there's a lot of gaps in the reality. First of all, as many of you know, you don't have to go to school in Pennsylvania until you're 8 years old. Now, once you start, you have to continue. But we felt that we needed to get on board and start at age 6. There was some discussion about whether it should go up to age 18. We couldn't get collaboration in our group for that, so we didn't make any recommendations with that. We did urge a lot of definitional amendments. And quite frankly, we're really looking for champions out there to take these proposals and work them with your legislators and get people excited about this, because in the systems, there's a lot of difficulty for magistrates, school personnel, and others to really understand what is going on procedurally with truancy. There's a lot of definitions that, as I said, that could be enacted. There's a lot of procedural safeguards that could be put in place. There's not even a definition of what the burden of proof is in a truancy case. Many of you may know that if you're 13 years old, you can be fined for not going to school. And then, if you are fined, the magistrate must send that conviction to the Department of Transportation, and when you get old enough to get a driver's license, you can't get one. It's delayed. Now, what 13-year-old do you know that's going to sit there and say, you know, I got to go to school today because when I'm 3 years from now and I want to get my driver's license, they're going to stop me. It's not effective. I had a kid recently. They piled up all the citations. He had $900 in truancy fines, and he's 14 years old. We need to adjust some of this. So one of our recommendations is we're asking that threshold level for fining goes up to age at least 15, and that children under the age of 15 who have truancy issues get them referred to children and youth where they can work with the families. There are a lot of recommendations that would take a huge amount of time, but one thing that I do want to emphasize, you heard the reference about the truancy elimination plan. We're proposing to make that not optional, but mandatory. And that occur in the school system before the case can come to court. Get the family, get the counselors, get the parents, and whoever, agency, community providers, bring them together, try to solve the problem if you can. And, you know, we're not going to eliminate truancy. Let's be honest about it, any more than we're going to eliminate drug usage. But we can do better. So we would like to see this called a school attendance improvement plan. That's more realistic. That's strength-based. That can happen. And if you start getting people, now look, Billy, you've missed 30% of the days this quarter. Let's see if we can get you up to only missing 10%. And then later on, let's see if we can get you to missing only 5%. Something that's realistic with these children. And we do have the legislative proposal available that we can share with anyone that's interested. The changes are quite extensive, and as I say, we do need a champion to pursue that. And knowing the hour, I'm going to stop.
Judge, I just have one further thing that I'd like to add. You'll see that there's a poster that's sitting up front here. This poster was actually a result of a project that our work group did about 2 years ago. We actually engaged school districts from across the Commonwealth, along with judges and local children's roundtables, to come with us and come up with what we could use as a truancy prevention logo for our efforts. So what you see in front of you is the poster. It's a result of hundreds of different drawings that were submitted to us to take a look at and vote on. That is a drawing from a 5th grader, I believe somewhere through the central part of the state. I can't remember which county. I can't remember exactly. So those posters are available out there for you all to take. Please take one back, share it in your schools, share it with your school districts. If you need more of them, you can contact us, and we'd be happy to get those to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, if you'd like to stretch your legs but not leave the room, we'd appreciate that. We're just going to take a moment to get some microphones prepared for our next group of speakers. But like I said, please don't leave the room. Thank you. It's 11. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Mr. Gary Chapman, our moderator. He's the Executive Vice President of Communities and Schools National Office. So, Gary, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Communities and Schools works in 27 states and in D.C., and we work to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. We have proven results in increasing graduation rates and decreasing dropout rates, and improving attendance, behavior, and course performance for students. So I'm really excited to moderate this panel. Business partners are at the core of the work that we do at Communities and Schools. I'm not so excited that I am the moderator standing between you and lunch. And As a former principal, I know what happens when everybody gets hungry in the building, so we will stick to time and make sure that we accomplish our work here by 12 o'clock. So I am joined by three terrific panel members. We have Dave Kerr from AT&T, Pennsylvania, Regional Vice President of External Affairs. We have Christopher Markley from Penn National Insurance, Vice President of Corporate Communications, and Dr. Marcella Diaz-Myers, President of the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. So thank you all very much for being here. I'd like to ask Dave first, what are the motivations for businesses to be involved in solving the dropout problem?
First of all, appreciate very much the opportunity to be here, representing a fairly large company you may have heard of before. But when you talk about dropout prevention, school and career readiness, it's an issue we've been very involved in, both with communities and schools at the national level and here in Pennsylvania. And it really comes down to three things for us. Our future workforce. When you look at STEM education, when you look at soft skills in our retail stores, very important. I mean, our retail stores, for example, are not what they used to be. The product lines, the types of things that we're asking our frontline retail employees to do is very, very important and very complicated. The devices we sell are not what they used to be. They're very multi-developed computers, if you will. So that's very important. When you look at our recent hires for AT&T, about two-thirds, this is about the last year or two, of our recent students and interns that we hired started in technology, whether it was an IT position, app developer position, and it's only growing. So those types of skills are very important for us. It's also very, when you look at the issue of where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years, we need employees, and students dropping out takes away from us a very significant part of our future employees. And, we pride ourselves at AT&T on a very diverse workforce, so we need that workforce to move forward. When you look at, for example, in engineering, and you've seen some of these statistics, but India last year, or 2 years ago, turned out 600,000 engineers, and U.S. universities turned out 84,000. That's a big issue. As we look at employees that are developing components for wireless devices, we need that in America, not overseas. So we need to not only support dropout prevention efforts for our future workforce, but the economy and global competitiveness. That's very important. And then lastly, the third item is strengthening families and communities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but when you look at companies like AT&T, I talk about 4 pillars, if you will. We've got our employees, we've got our customers, public companies like ours, we have shareholders, owners, if you will, and then communities. So each of those 4 pillars is very, very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Just one more statistic to leave with you. In 2010, our company alone, we have about 250,000 employees across the country and across the world. We spent $260 million on employee training. So it's a bottom line issue for us as well, training. If we're not getting students to stay in schools and ready for careers, it's a significant expense. And you go back to the shareholders, the owners of the company, that's part of the justification we make there. And also another figure for tuition reimbursement. In 2010, we spent $34 million. So again, significant expense as well.
Great, thank you, Dave. So Christopher, what about for Penn National Insurance? What are the motivations for you all to be involved in solving the dropout epidemic?
My company's motivations are probably somewhat similar to those that you mentioned. Penn National Insurance has been headquartered here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where we were founded in 1919, so almost 100 years. And we're very fortunate in that we have an unusually high employee tenure. We have people who start with us right out of college and make a whole career there. It's very unusual. The problem is, though, that we're facing a retirement bubble like a lot of companies. We have an aging workforce, and we need to rapidly begin to recruit and develop the next wave of professionals who will come in and lead the organization. So, our stake is sort of twofold. Altruistic, because we were founded here and we care about this town and the city and the school district, and we want to do our part in making it better and stronger. But it's also selfish, because we want to make sure that we can hire top people right here in our own town bring them in here at our headquarters level and develop them. In addition to that, I think all companies eventually figure out where their philanthropic niche is. Some organizations are arts-oriented, some civic, some health and wellness related. My company, for probably about 30 or 40 years, has had a real focus on education. And we find, as we've tried to pick up some projects in the arts and civic and other community things, employees don't respond as well. And our educational focus, I think, is really closely attuned to what people who work for our organization care about. So it's important to people in our company that we invest in education, do what we can to help reduce the dropout rate and create a successful workforce for ourselves.
Great, thank you. So it really sounds like future workforce and global competitiveness in particular are two areas that you all see are very important. So Marcella, from the school board's perspective, why do you see businesses and corporations investing not only their financial resources but also their human resources into education and into nonprofits?
Well, I guess the first answer is because we're preparing the workforce for all these gentlemen here. That's the most important one. I think, we need to definitely invest in education. It is one of the it is the pillar of democracy. This country is built it's one of the biggest democracies in the world, are probably the strongest one. And we need to be sure that it continues to be that way. As a school board members, we have an obligation to have policies and procedures in place for our teachers and our administrators to be able to do their job. So from the school board perspective, we need to facilitate that for our administrators and our teachers. We have been talking a little bit about how difficult the financial issues are for schools right now. But I think that instead of seeing it as a burden, I see this as an incredible opportunity for all of us to be a little bit more creative and innovative and create public-private partnerships, like the partnerships that are being created with many companies here in the state. And let's start thinking in a different way. For us in the Pennsylvania School Board Association, we represent 4,500 school board members, 500 school districts. It is our obligation to respond to the change in the environment of the educational field. And I think it's an obligation for all of us to do that. Personally, I am very tired to hear from all my colleagues, we need more money. I think that what we need is to start thinking very creatively, innovatively, and start creating more and more partnerships with our private partners.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, in many ways, it's not just about what's happening in the school, but about the community and all the partners that can be there to really support kids in the building. So, Dave, could you tell us a little bit about the work that AT&T is doing specifically to support dropout prevention and school success?
Absolutely. And recognizing the title of the panel is Beyond Funding, I'm not going to talk a great deal about amounts of money or some of the programs, which we're obviously very proud of, certainly the partnership with communities and schools and a number of other organizations nationally and at the state level. But just as important, I think, for AT&T is the two assets that we have that I think about the most. Aside from financial assets, it's our employee base and it's also our technology. And both of them are assets. And as you're talking to other businesses, I think it's important that you identify what their assets are too, whether it's a global company like ours or a relatively large insurer like Penn National, or even a small business. They have assets. They have employees. I go back to the four pillars: customers, employees, communities, and shareholders. Shareholders aren't relevant for some, but that employee base is very, very important for us. We have, and it starts at the top with us. Our CEO is very committed to job shadowing and mentoring. He takes a day out of his schedule on a monthly or every other month basis to spend an entire day with a student. And that's something a business of any size can do. Bring them into the business, and it starts at the top. If you're a small business of 12 people, and maybe you're a line or a frontline employee, but you see your CEO or your leader of your business spending the time, it's very important. And that is what's kind of drilled down into our company. I mean, that important aspect of spend the time. We're happy that we've mentored 100,000 kids nationwide, and that's a large number. And whether the number is large or small, given the size of your business, that's critically important. We've launched an Aspire Mentoring Academy. Our overall philanthropic effort is titled AT&T Aspire, but an important part of that is mentoring, the job shadowing opportunity. We do this in our facilities, large and small. We don't do it as much in our retail facilities, but whether it's a call center, whether it's taking a student out to see a cell site or a cell switch, that's critically important that they get out of the classroom environment and see that type of thing. Another thing I want to talk about a little bit is technology. We sell products that are disruptive. Some of you in the schools may certainly agree with that. Maybe some of the judges in their courtrooms might agree with that as well. But it's disruptive, but that can also be an advantage. If it's disruptive, we just had a discussion about truancy. Maybe there are ways to use technology to further educate people around truancy. So look at the assets. It's something we're looking at, whether it's our relationships with some gaming companies. Those types of things that motivate students, I think, are critically important. So that's important.
Great. So I'm hearing a lot about human capital and how you can bring in mentors and really provide a lot of the focus on students with your employees, and also technology. I know specifically AT&T is a big partner with communities and schools on the national, state, and local level. And I was amazed to hear recently about the technology piece and how you can help us to really be connecting broadly with folks, whether it's through text message or mobile technology in general, but just ways that we can really get the message out about what work is going on and what resources are available to students. So Christopher, for you, what about Penn National? What are you guys doing to support dropout prevention?
We've been involved in a lot of things over the years, and fortunately our management has always been happy to take a really long-term investment approach. We don't demand to see immediate results, and we've understood that you need to make an investment when children are young and follow it through as they grow up through the system. So over the years, I guess about 10 years ago, we provided some funding that allowed the Harrisburg School District to reintroduce pre-K and full-day kindergarten. And we understood at the time that very young children were falling through the cracks early on and falling behind in their reading. And so for a number of years, we were putting a lot of our funding into early intervention reading programs to make sure that the really young kids in kindergarten, first and second grade didn't fall behind, realizing that if they did, maybe they couldn't catch up and eventually would drop out. As part of that, for quite a few years, we had a mentoring program with an elementary school that was located close to our headquarters, where about 50 volunteers from our employee ranks would go to the elementary school, meet with the students, sit down and work on their reading exercises for the week. And that was very successful. It was a great opportunity for our employees to get to know the students and the teachers. And I think the students at first were intimidated by business people coming in dressed up in business clothing, but they formed friendships, and it helped the children understand what happens in that company down the street. Oh, I know some people there. And so we formed relationships. We did that for quite a while. We've also provided funding for organizations that give students opportunities to visit college campuses. One organization that comes to mind is Project Forward Leap. And then last year and this year, we've provided some funding for the Central Pennsylvania Friends of Jazz to take young musicians at Harrisburg School District, take them onto a college campus for a week or two, and just be immersed in music education. But more importantly, they're on a college campus, and they're young, maybe 13, 14, 15 years old, maybe never were on a college campus before, but they become comfortable because of that visit. And they can then project ahead and think, oh, okay, well, when I graduate, I've been on a college campus, I've been in a cafeteria, I've stayed in a dorm over the summer. I'm not as intimidated as maybe I would have been. So we've liked that type of program. For a number of years, we also had a program with a local elementary school in the Harrisburg School District in which buses of students would arrive at our corporate headquarters, and 40 or 50 of these cute little first graders would come pouring into the building with their little school books, and they would sit down in the offices of corporate executives and work on reading assignments. And the benefit of that program was twofold. The children improved their reading skills, which we found to be very strong right from the outset. But more importantly, again, it was experiential. The children came into a corporate environment. They made friends with corporate people who were dressed up in a very formal way. And they got over the fear of that, and they realized, hey, I've been in a big corporate environment before. So our feeling was that at a very young age, we gave children a positive experience in which they felt confident about being successful in what they did in an environment that might have otherwise been foreign to them. So we found a lot of rewards from investing in programs like that. Currently, we're talking about some programs, potential with Harrisburg University right here, in which there might be some opportunities for Harrisburg High School students during the school day to take college courses here at the university, get a leg up so that when they graduate they can enter college and succeed and gain the confidence while they're still in school that they've got the skills to do that at the college level, which probably reduces the chance of students involved in a program like that dropping out.
I think it's terrific as a nonprofit executive to hear that your vision is that you're supporting folks in the long term and you're working with students from basically cradle to career is really impressive and something that we hope that more businesses will do. So, Marcella, for you, how do you think school districts and nonprofits can leverage additional resources at the local, state, and national level from corporations and associations that you know of?
I think one thing that we promote is the creation of foundations, of educational foundations, and I think one very good example is the Harrisburg Educational Foundation, which you guys support. I think it's a very good way to create that private-public partnership that is so critical. I can help in commenting on what David commented about the electronic devices. I think that is one of the incredible things that is happening now in education, the innovation with electronic devices. How many of you here are teachers, if any? Do you allow your students to bring electronic devices in the classroom? No? Okay. What a waste of opportunity that is. We have seen students bringing their own, electronic devices to the classroom and using that to the maximum of their capacity as an educational tool. We see in the educational field, for example, the partnership with AT&T as a possibility to create more and more advanced technology and allow the students to really do what they know how to do better, and is play with those little electronic devices doing incredible things. I find absolutely fascinating, when people just go and say, just leave your phone out here and just go and sit there and learn. Why don't you just take that phone and go and learn with that particular device? So in all those things, I think we can create a lot of different partnerships with private industry. I think another area where we can definitely partner is in the mentorship area. We definitely know that the role models are critically important for our students. Unfortunately, we do not have too many. We only have few role models, for example, in the Latino community or in the African American community. So we need to create continue those partnerships with the private industry in order to bring the successful minorities of the workforce and bring them to the schools, and so the kids can tell, boy, I can do that. They can relate to that relationship. Because in many times, even the teachers in the school, are from the same background of the students. And it's not because, the schools don't try. It's just sometimes it's very difficult to find that diversity in the educational field.
So two specific areas, technology and mentoring, building relationships. I know that no matter what we set in motion with the students and families we work with, it's the relationship that's the center of that. So creating that opportunity can really lead to some tremendous success. So how about for you, Christopher, how do you see school districts and other nonprofits leveraging opportunities with Penn National?
Well, we've had a very good experience with contributing through Pennsylvania's Educational Improvement Tax Credit Program. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with how that program works, but so many businesses don't realize the benefit of this program, where a business gives $1 and receives about 90 cents back in tax breaks for that $1, so the net cost is 10 cents. So when I look back over time at my company's approximately $2.5 million that we put through the EITC program into the Harrisburg School District, the net cost to my company is about $250,000, which to us over a number of years as a large corporation is not a lot of money. But to put $2.5 million into a school district, that's a lot of money. And so we think it's really important for school foundations to do a better job getting the word out to businesses, large and small, about the value of this program, especially the small businesses. Large businesses like ours know about the program, but small mom and pop businesses can make a donation of a couple $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, a truly meaningful gift to a school district, and that cost can net down. 90% comes back. So if the word of that got out, I think quite a bit more money would flow into school districts from this EITC program.
That's terrific. So the Tax Credit Improvement Program. Mm-hmm. Dave, how about for you? What work can school districts and nonprofits do to leverage more resources with AT&T?
I think the important thing for school districts, nonprofits, and overall community can do is continue to work together. I mean, I don't need to tell you all about dwindling resources out there, but there are resources out there. As a funder, we're approached frequently, as I'm sure many companies are. When you look at the assets, and we talked a little bit about a community-based approach around truancy and around dropout prevention, getting all the players together and recognizing that maybe what one organization does is stronger than another organization. So not replicating maybe what another organization is doing, but finding a niche role and working together as a community. It's not always easy to hear that somebody else might be doing something better than you, and you may need to refocus your efforts. But I think communities at large need to understand that and prioritize that. I think it's important, we look at kind of a socially innovative approach. When I keep coming back to our employees, our customers, and our owners, our shareholders, we think the socially innovative approach where what we're doing around job shadowing and investing in mentoring is critical, not only to justify to us as a company, but also to our employees. We take what our employees say very seriously. If we hear about local projects, Penn National is more of a local company, but for us it's important that we hear from our employees about some critical priorities out there at the school level or the community level. But also it's easier to justify to our owners, our shareholders. And I think that's important for everybody to recognize when you're approaching a business, that businesses have owners or people they need to justify their investments to.
Great. So where do you all see the business sector heading in the next 10 years to maximize investments and impact? And are there emerging trends that we should be considering throughout this dialogue? I'll start with Marcella.
Well, I think we talked about the foundations, and I think that that's one area where we are going to go, especially with the challenges in school funding. This is not just an area only of education. I think that we all know that our economy is not as good as we would like for that to be. So again, I think the partnerships are going to be more critical than ever. The public-private partnerships are going to become essential for education. So as a school board members, what we need to do is definitely nurture those partnerships with our private partners. be a little bit more open-minded in how we approach education. One of the things that, for example, in my school district that we really struggle is how can we change the calendar of the school district? And it has been very difficult. And I know, Dr. Knight, you were an innovator in opening the calendar more during the summer. It is difficult, and it has to do also with the private industry because of the tourist industry. So we need to find a balance. I think that we need to work together. When we started this conversation, the videos say collaborate, coordinate, and communicate. I think that's exactly where we need to go. We need to start collaborating. Somebody has to help us coordinating this, and we definitely need to communicate.
Great. I like those. Dave, how about for you?
I think businesses, no matter what industry you're in, this is becoming a very globalized society, a hyper-competitive society. Customers are becoming more educated, are becoming, which I think is a good thing. It presents a number of challenges for businesses. We've talked about technology already, but I think another focus for businesses is changing demographics and the skill gap amongst certain demographics. Businesses are going to be significantly challenged by that, I believe, in the next decade and short term and long term. And I think funders are going to continue to look at evidence-based programs that are out there. And I think more and more what I'm seeing, and we saw it in some of the student feedback I think you talked about earlier this morning before I got here, out talking to some of the students in the schools. We need to find a way to continue to motivate students, because that was one thing that came out very clearly in the research, and that is students are not motivated. There's so many distractions out there. Of course, I think we sell some devices that lead to that, but they're distractions. We need to maximize students' motivation to really combat this problem.
Great. So I think, as Christopher said, helping to gain exposure for students, right, to really connect what they're learning in the classroom to the real world and what's going to happen beyond. So having evidence-based programs that will allow you to do that is extremely important. So, Christopher, for you, where do you think we're headed?
Well, in my first remarks, I mentioned my own personal pride in the fact that my company for years has taken a very long-term investment commitment, putting money into children when they're very young and tracking right through. I will say, though, that I'm beginning to see an increasing impatience among our executive leadership, impatience with all of the bad news that the media spews out about increased dropout rates and declining test scores. And so for businesses who've taken the long-haul, long-term investment approach, I think there's gradually some impatience developing and a desire to see more of a return on the investment. But I'm a public relations communications person by trade, and I usually see problems in terms of communications issues. I think the long-haul, long-term investment approach that we've been taking all along is the right approach and will continue to be the right approach. The problem, I think, is in a breakdown in communications where the success stories coming out of the schools where we've invested our money, those stories aren't necessarily getting back to the funders. And, schools are in the business of educating. They're not in the business of doing public relations, and I'm glad of that. But yet there needs to be a better way to get the success stories back to the donors so that we can see that despite all the bad things that you hear about in the media, there are successes that are directly attributable to the contributions that businesses make to schools. So that's one breakdown in communication. And then I'll point the finger back at myself. There's a problem that businesses have that contributes to the dropout rate. And that is that we don't communicate the stories of the opportunities that we offer to students of every type. I work at my company's headquarters, so we tend to have a lot of higher skilled, higher education people working there. But throughout my company, it's amazing when you look at the educational diversity of the people who work for us. I think students have no idea, what is this property casualty insurance company? What is that? What do you need to know to work there? Are you all accountants or actuaries? And students don't even know what those things are. And we had a division vice president a few years ago who had a joint, a double major in college, chemistry and clarinet performance. So how does that relate to property casualty insurance? He figured it out, and he was very successful. We need to do a better job educating students about the opportunities in corporations like ours, explaining to them how their interest in the humanities can prepare them for work at our company, how their interest in science and mathematics can prepare them. So we want to hear more from the districts about their successes so we feel good about our investments. And we need to make sure that we get our story out to students. Stick with it. Finish your education. You wouldn't believe the opportunities that are out there. Despite the bad news in the job market, we have positions that are hard to fill.
So I'm hearing a number of themes here. Partnership is going to play a greater role in the future, and so having this discussion is extremely timely and important. Coordinating, communicating, and collaborating is going to be the wave of the future. Having evidence-based programs that we're implementing and that funders are there looking at to help support with human capital as well as resources, and that we've got to ensure students are motivated. So how do we connect what's happening in businesses and the corporate world with what they're doing in the classroom? And that ultimately we have a communication issue. We're not communicating enough about the successes that are happening and how a business or corporation's investments are directly correlated to what's happening and what those successes are. So with that, I think we'll open it up for some questions from the audience.
So advice to businesses in rural communities? Advice to...
So where you don't have as many of the corporate or business partners that you could bring to the table, how are there ways to generate other people or to think differently about who partners might be that you can bring to support you?
That's a tough one, but the return through EITC to the business is so great that I think even in the smallest communities with the smallest businesses, I think there are untapped funding sources that don't realize how much of a difference they can make with a modest gift that nets down to almost no cost.
I think there are some businesses that are required, whether it's a bank through a CRA or something like that, but I would agree. We're participants in the ITC program as well, and it's a significant benefit to us. So I would suggest even the limited business community you might have there would be interested in something like this. And I know the credits go, I know that's been increased over the last few years by the governor and by the legislature, but I think you might have some interest there, even just getting the word out on it. Yeah, the Department of Community and Economic Development runs the program. I believe their website is newpa.com. I used to work for the department, so I know a little bit about it. But that would be the place to start. And they have different elements of education improvement organizations. You probably know Christopher better than I do.
Yeah, the key, though, is for a school district, the school district can't receive the funds directly. It has to flow through an approved foundation. Right. So school districts set up a foundation that's a separately chartered entity that gets approval from the DCED. Once that approval is granted, then companies like mine can give our money to the Harrisburg Public School Foundation, which is a separate entity from the district. The foundation then provides the funds to the district. So there's that fiduciary role that the foundation plays. But the district must first have an approved foundation. I don't think that they're all that hard to set up. That's easy for me to say. But I'm sure DCED can provide assistance with that. but there has to be a foundation.
And you need to have some leadership within the school district in order to create your foundation. We have seen a lot of foundations blooming in the rural areas of Pennsylvania due to the Marcellus Shale. And the incredible partnerships that many of our school districts have formed with the Marcellus Shale companies are absolutely incredible. And they are making a tremendous difference. And, that type of thing is just, getting creative and, approaching the new businesses in the area. Everybody has internet, everybody has cable. Those are huge corporations and companies that provide services to your community, even if you are a small community. So, your superintendents and school boards need to get together. There are many resources out there. The Pennsylvania School Board Association has some resources in how to establish a school foundation. So you can go to our website, psba.org.
Thank you. Other questions?
You think about some of your partners, nonprofit partners, and so forth. And can you talk about what sold you on partnering with these nonprofit partners? For instance, I think about, you must have many partnerships with organizations, some maybe higher quality than some others. What are the things that, for you, make good partnerships?
I'll take a stab at that. Evidence and evidence-based research demonstrated ability to reach students, depending on what the metrics are and such, are things that are drilled down to me by my corporate office and our corporate foundation people. We're in the business of getting results, so that's critically important for us. And there are different elements of that, of course, but we really rely on the research and the science and making a difference in the lives of kids. It's all about kids, and that can be a challenge sometime, I think, as we discussed, getting leadership and having some flexibility if you're trying to get a new program off the ground, that type of thing. But that's critically important for us in what we're looking for at the local level.
Similar comments from me on that. We have a 3-person team that filters through all the requests that we get for funding. And we first need to see compelling documented outcomes evidence to satisfy our analytical business minds. But then we want something that breaks our hearts and sometimes makes us sit there and cry. And the organizations that have achieved partnerships with us have gotten in the door by demonstrating true measurable outcomes. So we know that our money will be well spent. But they've also really engaged our hearts. And more often than not, that's done by bringing children in, young people, high school students, into the meetings and asking those students to comment on the value of the programs. And it's difficult to do, but, again, I'm a communications and PR guy. It's all about storytelling, truthful storytelling, because there's so many beautiful stories about lives being turned around and changed by even modest gifts. But you need to touch and warm the hearts of these cold business people. So think about how you can tell those stories and balance it out with documented financial evidence that the money's being well spent.
I think it's a great point. It is about the heart and the head, and many times our organizations think about one or the other, and it really does take both, that you've got the evidence and the results, but you can really tell the story about what's happening. So thank you.
This is more of a statement than a question, and that is art. Everyone knows that Harrisburg has been at the forefront of trying to find ways to keep our district going. And it has been very much a task. But one of the things that Mr. Markey has been able to do, as he said, is work with us with our most important base, and that's our pre-K and our kindergarten. And it was also a task because we always have to cut those things that are not mandated by law. So our athletic program is also going. So when they stepped in and with their EITC funds helping us, we were able to get the District 3 championship this year with our basketball team. And I just can't begin to tell you what wonderful feelings it is to know that we have folks who really are friends to education. And so I encourage all of you to pursue those relationships. But thank you for choosing us, and thank you for making a difference in the lives of our kids. We're having a big pep rally next week to just allow the kids, those who were able to participate, and many of them received scholarships this year to go on to college, and that was because they had a chance to shine. And they're going to have a better life. And I just want to thank you for that.
That's great.
So there's a success story that needs to be tweeted on the AT&T mobile network. So please send it out there.
I'll do it right now.
I think we have time for one more question.
She forgot to mention the importance of the leadership at the school district level. So that is critical, Dr. Knight, so you forgot to mention that.
Yes. Any other questions? Everybody's hungry and ready. Great. All right, one more question.
Yeah, you mentioned the retirement bubble. Is that a projected date for that?
Well, at my company, we're in something of a state of a panic because we look around and we're all older people now, and it's difficult recruiting skilled young people who, first off, are interested in working at a property casualty insurance company, but there's this disconnect. Students thinking that there are no jobs out there, and then businesses like ours with an aging workforce, and we're having difficulty in recruiting talented people. So, the answer might be strengthening work that's being done in guidance offices to expose children to various business segments that have aging populations and problems recruiting.
I think it goes to motivation. I mean, it's very frustrating. There are smart kids out there. You hear a lot about cybersecurity, trying to tap into the network and do bad things. They're very smart. We have to hire people to combat kids that are out there on their own time, trying to do bad things to our network. Let's utilize that talent for the good of us and everybody in our industry, for that matter. So it goes back to motivation. I mean, and families and really finding a way to get through to motivate kids that there are resources out there. There's good out there to be done.
I always say our schools are not our grandmother's schools anymore. I think that we need to change the way that we do business in education in order to reach out to the kids. The kids are way ahead of us. This is even from 20 years ago. So we in the educational community need to start thinking in a different way in how we educate our children. And to that effect, I think that we need to motivate them more. Again, I have to go back to the electronic devices example. And so we need to start thinking differently, because if we don't, we're going to lose we're going to lose a generation here. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? So I think just as we wrap up, I've heard recently about a number of other ways that corporations and businesses are helping to support our organizations and districts. I know of a company that's been helping to do strategic planning. So business planning and strategic planning are part of their everyday work, and they're helping nonprofits to do some of that as well and bring those resources to the table. Definitely sitting on boards, having executives from the organization from the companies that are sitting on our boards, and really demonstrating that public-private partnership is extremely important. Cause marketing, that companies may not have the money to invest, but maybe they have an advertising budget, and so they can tell the story of what they're doing for your organization and help you to gain more awareness there. And then I know I heard from our folks in Philly who said that Wells Fargo is helping them with a financial literacy program, that they have the curriculum and they have folks at their office that are helping to deliver that curriculum out into the schools. So those are just a few examples of other ways to think about leveraging partnership that isn't necessarily financial as well. So thank you all very much for your time and for your expertise and for all of the contributions that you're making to our networks. Thank you.